Okay, right. Good morning. So we're working on this image today, which actually is not far from me. It's probably only about 6 or 7 miles from me. It's near Shrewsbury, and it's a lovely kind of wooded area with these massive trees. Um, and in the summer, you get all this lovely kind of fern, and then in the autumn, all of that turns really bright orange, which is again pretty fantastic. So I've done a few of those. And normally it's on the top or the side of a hill, so you've got this lovely blue sky um, contrasting the greens. It's a lovely area, but quite quite challenging, I suppose, really. But we'll give that a go today. Okay, so what I'll do first is again, like I normally do, is I'm going to just draw what I'm seeing because this is a quite complicated image, or it can be seen as quite a complicated image. We've got a path that's just winding through, going over through there, and then it's the sunlight. So we've got some bright green and some lovely shadows cast from trees and parts of the fern, and then bits of light on the fern here. So we kind of need to differentiate between the shapes, I suppose, and then darker greens and also greens in the background that push it back a bit into the distance. And then cutting through all of that, you've got these tall trees, which are kind of quite interesting trees. They're quite gangly trees, really. Okay, so we've got that. Let's have a look. Okay, so what I'm doing is I will look at this image, same composition. We've got a path. I'm not going to draw it out yet, but I'm just showing you how I see it. So there's a path kind of coming in, obviously here. So there's a lovely shape there. In the photograph, it's a bit straighter, I suppose, but we can kind of play with that. Then I'm looking at this shape. So you've got a verge here of this fern, which is a combination of dark and light in here, which again has different shapes and shadows within it. And then just at the end of the path, there's a lovely bit of light green, which is kind of just round about there next to this tree trunk that kind of goes up. So I suppose the composition is kind of going around and then it becomes vertical because of these trees. And then behind that lovely bit of bright green, which could extend behind there, really, just on there, you've got a series of trees, but um, trees that are, I suppose, a bit more bluey green. So we're going to try and push them into the distance. The trees we will put in a bit later on top, or maybe suggest where they are. We don't want to look at that detail. We just want to again think about the shape of the dark. So there's a dark area. You see that there. Lovely dark area there. And some dark areas just round about here. So it's looking close, I suppose, at this area. And that goes off there. So the tops of the trees tend to do this. And then above, there are patches of trees that are in the background. And then you've got trees that and parts of the greenery of the trees that are just here. And if you take away the trees, you've got a shape of blue. If you can see that, there's a corner here of this blue sky and then bits of blue that's kind of peeking through. So it looks kind of very complicated, but it's this shape of this verge. And then also on the ground here, there's lots of different kind of colors, I suppose, that kind of come in. Um, that line isn't a straight line either. If you look at it, it's a bit zigzaggy with the dark and the light and the shadow. But remember, this is just a reference as always, so we can play with it. We can move a tree around. We can, take a tree out. If you wanted to, you could pop one back in. But just looking at that. So if I was then, shading those in the background, that would make that stand out. Okay. Right, so I'm going to use a piece of mount board that I've just gessoed a bit sienna color, and it's quite warm, really, I suppose here, so that's quite nice with that. And I'm going to work straight from back to front as I normally do. Okay. have a look. So I'm going to start with my light blue sky color. There it is. And then some white, some titanium white. And then I'm gonna use a flat brush, but the brush is totally up to you. So the top of my, there it is, just move it in slightly. So you should see it there. The top of my board is actually right on the top of there, so that's fine. So I'm going to start with pure blue. So whatever blue you're using, it doesn't matter really, but ideally a lighter blue, a bit like a cerulean blue. You can use ultramarine, it's absolutely fine. You're going to do exactly the same thing. And all I'm doing is, in a way, forgetting about the trees and just going dark, pure color through to light. So mixing a bit of white with that, tiny bit of water. This is board, so it's sucking it in slightly. And I use the side of my brush. It's just me. We're going to have quite a bit of texture in this painting, so it's quite nice, I think, to have texture in that sky as well. Bit more water, so it's not just pure paint. That's it. And we're going to go below the green. So I'm just going to take it down gradually. And you need to get really quite light at the bottom. So making sure I've mixed that color. Bit of a focal point is not just the end of the path, but it's that bit in the center of the image where it's really quite light. And I suppose that depends on where you put those trees. So you could put, if you were using cerulean blue, you could put some ultramarine at the top with that cerulean blue to make it, even darker. So now I'm going quite light blue just at the bottom. So the trees will go over the top of this. That's fine. So this background here, I can see. So if I try not to look at the trees and just look at the blue, I've got that kind of wedge shape. I don't know whether you can see it. So that area, that blue comes down in the center just to the right. And to the right at the bottom here, there are trees there, but I can see it's lighter. So I'm going to go even lighter and just bring that down slightly to the right. There it is. It doesn't matter if we go quite low because we're going to go over the top of it anyway in a second. And you've got bits of blue that are coming through almost there, just above the path as well. So another thing you could do, I suppose, is either prime your board or your canvas this really light blue. That's another way. Or use blue paper. Sounds fine. So always go down lower than you think you need here, really. It's drying quite quickly, so that's fine. So I'm painting the blue. And if I wanted to make that much darker at the top, then I just go back into it again with that pure blue. And if it's dried slightly, it'll be slightly darker. There it is at the top. And then just scrape away underneath to blend it, really. Use your fingers if you want. That's it. And then the next thing I'm going to do, I'll just do this and then I'll slow down a bit, is just think a bit about my greens. So I've got that there. I'm going to use a hooker's green, along with my cerulean blue. And I've got a bright green, which is that leaf green really. It's a permanent leaf green, I think it is. You can mix your colors. I quite like using certain colors and then adding other colors to that color. So I use it as a base color really. And a Prussian blue. So I don't use a black, so I'm using that darker blue to darken my greens. Okay, so the key to it here for me is that blue that I'm using. Just gonna take a bit of that away so I can show you. All the time I'm going to bring some of that cerulean blue into the mixing. Okay, I'm going to start with this hooker's green. And sometimes it's quite nice to have a strip of that same color at the side so that you can test it out on that color. I've just got an offcut there that I use. You could use white, but obviously if you're working on white, it's a slightly different color. But that pure hooker's green is a bit too acidic, really. So what I'm going to do here is mix a bit of that and then bring in some of my lovely cerulean blue. So small amounts, not loads and loads. We're just playing with mixing here and just seeing what we're doing. So more of that blue. So actually it is quite blue because we're looking to put in the distance of the green first. So more of that cerulean blue with that green. So it really is quite blue. There it is. You can see it at the side. And then possibly a tiny bit of white. And maybe a bit more. That's it. So that's kind of getting there. Okay. So the color's still quite dark, but it's quite different to the original color that I've just popped in. So it's governed by the blue. So that blue that you started with, don't be afraid to put more than you need of that blue. Because I think on my iPad here, if you zoom in, that green does look really quite blue, really. And then I'm going to kind of map it out, I suppose. Let's have a look back to front. I'm starting to look at, if you look at that center tree there, It's dark and light either side. So I'm just going to start to work with the greens here. It'll be dark, and then on top of that, I'll put lighter greens afterwards. But I've got to put something down to see where we're going. It might be that you've drawn this out. It doesn't matter. If you've drawn it out, that's absolutely fine. I'm going straight into it with my green. So I'm scratching. I'm just looking at that shape. I'm looking at where possibly the path goes. The path doesn't end in the middle, it's slightly to the left. So we're looking at maybe the path ending there. So with your green, you could suggest where that path is starting and ending. So let's just pop that in there. Great thing about acrylics, you can just paint over. You don't like it, you don't think it's right, etc. So it's a very bluey green, really, I suppose, this. It'll make more sense when we put brighter light green on top. The direction of the brush is important. So I've got a flat brush here. So if I'm painting vertically, I've got something that's standing up, which it kind of looks a bit like that. So I'm not painting flat across. I'm trying to paint with angles on there so that it looks like it's kind of standing up. It's like vegetation, really. So this line there that's being created is my light green line, I suppose. Always should be, I think, a bit lighter or a bit bluer than you think. You don't want it too green yet. That's it. And then as I'm working my way with this, so I haven't got lots of paint on my brush. It's slightly wet, but not too wet. If it's too wet, I get all these sharp edges. So I want it to have texture. And as I'm applying it, I want some of that blue to come through the greens. That's kind of important. So less paint on my brush. So I'm scraping my brush and letting that brush do the work. And as I'm going up the page, probably less paint. And look, I'm trying to look at those shapes of green. I'll show you there, that kind of shape I was looking at there. It's like a triangle shape. I'm just popping that in with my brush. So it's slowly just mapping things out. Remember, it's just a reference, so it doesn't have to be exactly. It might be that things are slightly that way. It's difficult thinking, I suppose, that you've got tree trunks there, and the danger is putting those tree trunks in too soon, I think, and then being governed by those. So I think we need to put those on top of the greens so that they sit on top. So with the edge of my dry brush, I'm drawing. So I've got that there, and I'm just looking at maybe the edge of it rather than the top of it. And I'm just placing that on. I've started with a path that big, but it's not that big, so I'm now starting to make that just a bit smaller. Yeah, it's quite a big path, so I've made it quite big, so I'm just going to just change it slightly. That's it. Okay, so we've got a bit of a structure there. I could just put a bit more just looking at that, but that green that I've got there now, I want to change it slightly. So I want to add something to it just to change that color. I've got some Naples yellow here. So if you've got some Naples yellow or possibly yellow ochre, Naples yellow is good. It's just bringing that a bit of yellowy warmth into that green, but not going too sandy colored too soon. It's about experimenting here, isn't it? So get water on my brush. So I'm going to start with that color that I've mixed. So I've still got it here, and I'm just going to introduce a tiny bit, just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of that Naples yellow to parts of that mix. So what I'm doing is I'm changing that color just slightly. There it is. So there is a change, but you can see it relates to that previous color. Actually, that's quite light. So I've just popped it on there, and you can see a real difference. So I'm now looking at those um, the kind of areas of trees that are in light. So maybe coming back to that, just adding a bit more of that Hooker's green back to it, just so that it's not too yellow. Because I want to go lighter again. I just want to change this color. There we go. That's better. Tiny bit of that Hooker's green again. Small amounts of paint I'm using here actually, which is important. And then let's now just really mix that and then look at where you can make bits up. It doesn't matter. I'm just popping in some of these lighter bits of green, I suppose, but still being aware of that blue in the background. And I understand that it might be difficult just looking at it without the trees, but it will make sense when we pop the trees on top. So it's a small change, a small difference in tone of color. It's a green image, isn't it? So we've got to experiment with the greens, really. It's all about the sunshine. And then let's take this up towards the top. I'm going to make that green slightly darker. Still using the same mixing area. A tiny, tiny bit of Prussian blue into that. I think it's important that I'm not putting flat areas of color. I want it to be dry and because it will give you that texture. If it's flat, that's absolutely fine, but it will be chunky, a bit Cezanne-like, I suppose, in a way. So more of that blue, because at the top of the image it's slightly darker, but it's not black, it's blue. So I'm using the green and I'm just trying to paint shapes of darker green with a bit of darker blue in it. So it's just almost blobs of paint, isn't it, really? You've got darker branches as well at the top. So it may be that you want to use part of this darker green to look to as the shadow, really, I suppose, of the tree trunk rather. I suppose I'm more concerned with the blue in the background than I am with the with this green to a certain extent. Slightly darker. So I'm going darker green with my Prussian blue and my Hooker's green, and maybe a tiny bit of that cerulean blue in there as well, so it has a link. And then instead of spending all my time just at the top, I want to come back down and start looking for the next darkest bit. So if you look at this, you've got it's darker, and at the moment I've made it darker. But as soon as I put another slightly darker bit of green on top of this area, it's going to make it darker again. But you'll still have some of that green peeking through. So I'm now starting to draw or paint that area there where it's in shadow. But still have some of that's really important. Still have some of that blue that's just oh sorry, green, that lighter green that's peeking through. So I'm going to go darker green again afterwards, but so it's just another layer just building up. So really, it's just that area there I was just looking at. So you can see it's darker against the tree and it's darker there. But the tree will go on top of this in a second. And with the edge of my lovely flat brush, I can carve into that. So there we go. Look, it's light, but I can carve in to get the shape of those ferns. So just a bit more blue, some lighter cerulean blue. So I see a lot of that on this side. I see a bit more of that lighter blue. So all the time I'm using that same area to mix. So I'm going to bring in just a bit of that blue. And I'm holding back on that light green because I don't want to do that yet. I want to just think about these blue dark areas. Yeah, it's kind of silvery blue almost. You've got that reflection of those leaves. And I think that blue, more of that blue, tiny bit of white. That's it. Just going to make that darker there. And then we need to work further up here with those lighter greens. We've also got, and this is kind of quite important, I'm playing with this area here, conscious of this path, but in the foreground, it looks quite bright, but there's a lot of that green that's there in that shadow. So what I want to do is that lighter green with that blue again, so it's that last color that I put on, just look for some areas of dark. So there's a shadow there, and we can see that shadow there it is, that kind of shadow there going across the shadows here. So they're just, I see them as, that's what's lovely about this flat brush. Um, you can just pop them in just with a mark. So we've got some undergrowth, I suppose, haven't we? We've got some shadows with the green. It really is like drawing. That's what I'm doing. I keep saying that when I do demos, but drawing with a paintbrush, finding my way. Letting the painting come out, but according to the rules of connecting the colors to the previous color. Okay, so we are blocking those things in there. We're blocking the colors in, and it's just maybe it's two or three slight variations of that green, but you can start to see, I suppose, this landscape coming out. Now the difficult part, well, one of the difficult parts is just above there. It's the trees, and we've got to not overdo that so that we don't get rid of all of that blue sky. So what I'm going to do is use that color that I've got there. Now maybe start to try and bring in on one side and change that color. So a tiny bit of that light green, but a tiny bit. And again, if you've got something at the side, you can see, but also a tiny bit of that Naples yellow. And you'll know that it's just really a small amount, I suppose, that you're using that totally changes that color. But you've got to try it. You've got to mix. You've got to play and see what happens. So there it is. So it is dark, but it's also slightly lighter. So the Naples yellow is everywhere. The green is everywhere. So let's just try and make sense of just above here. So I'm now going to look at the shapes of the trees, but the color difference is not too far away from the previous one, but just slightly lighter and maybe a bit more earthy. Letting the brush again do the work. Yes, I can scrape that if I want to, different directions. I can fill in that area. And after this, I'll put my trees in so we'll get a sense of where things are. I'm conscious of that V there. That's important. That kind of V coming down with light in the middle. Can you see it there on the picture? It's there and it's maybe on this side. So I don't just want to go over the whole thing. There's more this side. And you can almost see I've made a little gap of where I think that tree's going to be. Can you see that little kind of stripe going down? So I'm conscious that it's there, but I don't want to put a line there yet. So I know that my tree is going to do that. Look, it's going to go vertically there. So I'm just almost doing the negative spaces. So there's a few just extending that way, and there's a few at the top of that. Now, some of yours, if you've got a portrait, your portrait might be longer, which is quite nice. Then your trees, will be much longer. Um, Mine is that shape, but it's slightly wider as well, I suppose. Just looking at that now, so it's you know maybe if you did this again, or you worked on two of the same, you do one that's taller and one that's less so, and just compare. Okay, I'm now popping a bit of Naples yellow into that color that I've just had, so that green again. So I'm just making it a bit more, obviously, there's a bit of sandy Naples yellow in there. Let's just change that color. Yeah, that's it. Maybe a bit more. And then there it is, starting to look for that. There's almost bits of red in that color. There we are. Maybe a bit more now, a bit more obvious with that Naples yellow, so you can see the color change. That green's going a bit more bleached out green with the Naples yellow. What a nice color. And then just looking for those kind of next lighter areas, making it up really. It's quite impressionistic. And I suppose it's the color that makes this work, bringing the color together. Maybe some of that color just bleeding into the path. That's nice. So we've got that lovely color that I've just popped down, that lighter color, but because I brought it forward, you can see it working with the others in the composition. And try a tiny bit more of that Naples yellow again. Let's just see what happens. Make an obvious change in color. Yeah, so I'm deliberately putting it there, then putting it here, and then looking for it maybe just up here, and then just moving around, move your eye around the picture or the painting and pop in where you think that is, and then hopefully it should tie it together color wise. Okay, right. So we've got greens. We haven't really touched that light green yet, and there are light green bits here, which we'll do in a bit. So I'm trying to do it in some kind of order, as you would do with a drawing, darker and light and tonal changes. Now let's think about, I suppose, the trees. Now, what color are those trees? So we've got almost, it's not a silver birch, it's this color that's standing up. Let's have a look. So I'm going to bring in uh, reds, actually. So I'm going to bring in a cadmium red to this and some burnt umber, a brown. I'm just going to clean that palette for a second. So I want to bring in some warmer colors, but not too much yet. So let's just do that. That's it. So when I do these trees, I don't want them to be really kind of bright. They're still kind of washed out and bleached out. So if you look at this color, you can probably see it on the screen. It's pinks really, pinks and purple. So yeah, the other color is, if you've got it, is a crimson or a magenta. And again, just a small amount of that because it's quite strong. And I'm just going to play with my colors here. So I've got a white and I've got those brighter colors. So with the crimson, let's start with that, shall we? So we've got this crimson color, and then with a bit of that blue, that cerulean blue, and a tiny bit of that white. Let's have a look and see this color. I want to compare. So I'm just doing this kind of mauve color at the moment. And let's just try a bit of Naples yellow at the side of that, really. That's better. So what we've got is a magenta, a mauve color with a bit of that blue. So always that blue is being mixed in there. There it is. And then the shine on it, because we've still got some of that kind of sandy color in there, a tiny bit of Naples yellow in there. So it's kind of a purple, light mauvey purple, but with a bit of that sandy color in. And not too much paint, but quite watery, I suppose. And let's just try this. So let's have a look. Yeah. I'm gonna paint the shadows. So can you see the shadows on the trees? So you see that lovely shadow there. See that lovely shadow at the base there. And then you've got other little shadows that start to happen. And then it's slightly dappled. Can you see? And then there's a shadow area there as you go up that tree. And then this tree in the center, can you see this that shadowy bit there? And then it's lighter, and there's maybe a shadow a bit at the side there. You can probably see that. So again, I'm now looking for those shapes. So with my flat brush, I'm just going to just pop in. There it is. So it's quite purple. Let's try and make that maybe a tiny bit more white, I think. I want it to be a bit bleached out. And this is where you can try to play. You could maybe say, oh, look, there's a bit of cadmium red there. What happens if I just put a bit of that cadmium red in, very tiny bit, and it just warms it up. Let's have a look. That's quite a lot, but doesn't matter. Yeah, that's too much. So let's just go back to that. So if you put too much of the color in, then just go back to that blue, go back to the white. Yeah, that's it. And just going to start to pop in. That's interesting because I've got the shadow here that I've just popped in there. But actually, when I put this color next to the green, it looks really light. So let's just put the whole thing in. I'm just going to use a straight line that goes down. So I'm using the edge, the side of my brush. And for me, it's important that that's straight there, but it's a bit wiggly here. So try not to make it, excuse me, like a telegraph pole. Try and make it so that it's slightly wiggly, possibly. Slightly fatter in some parts. There we go. That's it. So it's big, it's small, it's not, it's a bit more crooked, I suppose, a bit more organic. So let's just go, I'm just going to pop that in there and then put this just coming down like so. So it's quite watery again. I'm not committing to thicker paint. I'm also letting some of that color come through even in the trunk, if that makes sense. So on the bigger one here. And then with the side of your brush, think about the other trees. So the other trees are different sizes. Forget the ones in the distance, but there's a couple here. There's a couple just there on that right-hand side. Look at look at the angle on some of them. They're not straight like telegraph poles, they're bending slightly. And then there's another one just at the end of the path. So let's just try and work out where they are. Here's the thing, it's just that I know we haven't completed the rest of it, but symmetry, again, I keep saying is the devil's work at some point. If you were going to leave your painting, that wouldn't work with that being there because it's the same distance, but it doesn't matter because you're going to start to put the trees in and some trees that are quite close together and are slightly different apart. That's important there. So it's a bit bigger at the gap at the bottom. It's gangly. That's where my rigger brush will come in. I could try and put a couple of those in there. You see that little one in the distance? That's pushing it. That small one just there is pushing it further away down that path. This tree is quite big, so I'm just going to make it come forward, just make it slightly bigger. And so that those trees aren't all just standing out like sore thumbs at the moment, while I've got that color, I know this path is slightly warmer, but there's an element of that color in there. So I'm just going to start to put a few of those little shadowy lines of that color that I've used for the tree trunk into this foliage. Actually, that the shadow on there is very similar, isn't it? So the shadow on the tree there is quite similar to the shadow on the ground. So we could try and work with that. I'm going to put a bit more water with this and carefully with my brush that's parallel to the bottom of the page, just kind of take that back maybe across. Think about those shadows. Now there's blue in those shadows, so there will be more of that blue in this here in the foreground. So what I'm doing, I suppose, is I'm using my ground of my board as my light areas because I've made it sienna-y color or just quite a very light salmon, really, I suppose. It's quite similar to those lighter areas. So if you went out and painted and you knew where you were going, it would make sense to prime it in a similar color. I'm holding back. We'll do that in a bit. I hold it back on those bright greens that will make the contrast go. Well, that will be fairly soon, really. Do you see any of the tree trunk color in any of the leaves? Sorry, not the leaves, the branches above. You could start to use a rigger brush with that color. So this is just an acrylic rigger brush. Again, not straight lines. They're all quite jaggedy lines, really. So if you see any thinner areas, pop those in with a thinner brush. My paint's gone, so I've got to mix it up again. So I'm using crimson, blue. Here we are. So if I mix that again, what I've got is a crimson or a purple, a magenta, and then with quite a bit of that blue. And if you look at the base, maybe the base in shadow of the trees. Oh, I'll just pause that for a second. Okay, so let's just clean that palette slightly and we'll start working with some lighter greens and just play with that contrast. There it is. Okay, so let's have a look. I'm still going to use, well, I could use a smaller brush. I've got a bigger, flatter brush and I've got a slightly smaller, flatter brush. It depends on the size of your composition. I'll start with the bigger one, I think, and then get smaller. And today I'm getting loads of paint on my hands. I don't know why. Right, okay, let's get going. So we're going to consider the lighter areas. Just turning off my heater. So I've got a light green. So that light green is pretty nuclear, really, on its own. It's very, very bright. And I know actually looking at that, it is quite bright, but let's just try and think about this a bit more. So I'm going to be conscious of that Naples yellow, but also if you've got a lemon yellow or a light yellow, possibly. Just going to try a bit of that lighter yellow there. And now again, it's about playing with color mixing. So I'm just going to have a little tester here. If I can stick that there. There we go. So I've got just a little piece of board that's I've cut off from this when I cut it down. Okay, so wow, that's too bright. So let's pop a tiny bit of yellow with it. And then maybe a tiny bit of white, tiny bit of white. That's it. But the key to this is this green here. If I pop in a really, really light green, it has to have some relationship with that previous one, I think. So try a very small amount of that light blue, that cerulean blue that I use. But really, we're talking small amounts here. And I can see a subtle change. Well, actually, there's a bit more there, isn't there? There we go. Yeah, okay. And a bit more yellow. Because this bit here is really in the light. So a tiny bit of white, tiny bit of yellow. It is really about just playing and then popping it onto a surface and having a look. So this green is really related to that blue because I put a bit more in. Let's have a look. That's it. Okay, we can start with that. And that's almost, I think, like a bit like a mid-tone of this lighter green. So I can work with this and then I can go lighter and then I can go darker. And it's yellow. There's a yellow tinge to it. That's why I'm bringing in the lemon yellow, I suppose. Here we go. So let's try and see what happens. So without detail, what I'm doing is the same process of blocking in with my flat brush, and I'm moving that brush according really to the shape of, the lighter grass or fern that's there. So where you see any just lighter bits, just move that around. So there are some bits very lightly. I see here there's almost an arc of lighter green. So that kind of makes it look like there's almost like a hedgerow there. So I'm painting just the lighter bits. And then if I pop a bit of Naples yellow, quite a bit of Naples yellow into that, because we're going to go towards orange or whatever in a minute. And almost the mid color of that has got a fair bit of that Naples yellow in. Maybe even a tiny bit of cadmium red. So I'm just trying to warm up almost greeny browns. And you can see I've started there and then I'm moving along with this. There we go. So it's not red, it's not bright orange bracken, but it's got a kind of an underlying warmth, I suppose. And just move around the picture. And then maybe let's have a look and see. Maybe that's too light. So brown. So what I've got now, the next one into that, I put some burnt umber. There it is. That's it. And if you've got, I don't know whether you've got cadmium orange or a red. Not sure whether you've got orange, but you haven't got an orange, just mix that. So I haven't washed my brush. What I'm trying to do is just make that a bit brighter and then start to bring in some of that light blue, the cerulean blue, onto that. Thinking, oh, maybe a bit of red actually into that. So I'm going to bring cadmium red into that. You know, we've all got different colors, and I think it's just about experimenting, adding a bit to the color that you've got, and just kind of extending it. So I've started with the greens, I've gone through with a bit of Naples yellow, I've brought in some red and some orange. Yeah, that's two red. So now to tone it down, a bit of that blue. Yeah, that's better. And I'm now looking for shadows. Actually, let's go quite blue with that color. So it looks a bit of a dirty color, but here we go. So this color here, and there we go. So I'm trying to create a shadow. Now maybe a tiny bit of that crimson. Yeah, that's better. So I'm going to put more crimson into that. So it's changed. It's changed as I've gone along. And again, I'm just experimenting, but you know, more of that crimson into that shadow. There it is. It's darker. That's better. Let's make it darker. So maybe a bit of blue with that, so it's got a connection. The shadow, there it is. More blue. So I'm now painting, what I'm doing is I'm painting the kind of shadow parts of the edge of this path. And because it's got purple in it, hopefully it's bringing it forward. So let's go with more magenta, actually. Tiny bit of that light blue, cerulean blue. And then if I put white with that, yeah. So I'm trying to get now shadows on here. So I've come through from green, and as magenta seems to be taking over, a bit of white, but a bit of warmth with it. So it will look different on here than it does on there. There we go. So make it less chalky and a bit stronger with the purple. You've got to play and just see what kind of works for you and not being afraid to change it. So this flat area, a bit of water. I'll take a bit more water on that. And I'm going to think about those shapes going across at an angle. So my lovely flat brush is not just going straight across. You can see it's slightly at an angle. And then as it gets further away, I'm just going to put a bit more magenta into that with a bit of white, bleach it out a bit. And a tiny bit of that blue just over here. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's better. So we've got that blue, that cerulean blue it's giving it more of a body. See, there we go. So you've got, it's the blue in the shadow on the floor. So we got there. We got kind of working our way through. So it's the magenta, a bit of white, and then it's playing with the amount of that cerulean blue to make that look like it's that bluey shadow. And actually, with that warmer color next to that blue, there's something going on there which is quite nice as well. While I've got that bluey color, I'm going to look for it in the side. So there's quite a bit of shadow just here. Also, while I've got that color, there's a bit of blue in that color. So I've made it, you can see it's slightly darker. If you then looked at the trees and then put some marks in the trees, you've got that connection. So maybe there's a little mark on the edge of the tree. Maybe there's a shadow at the bottom of the tree there. And then I think we need to go pink with the light on the floor. And then get the rigger brush out, I think. So a bit more crimson into that and a bit more blue. You could use that as the shadow, possibly for parts of the tree. Just wash my brush. Okay, so we're taking stock and having a look and see the bits that we like. I quite like that kind of lighter pinky color that is coming through there, really. I'm going to work with this path and then look at where those colors are and also the light parts of the trees, because at the moment they're all kind of quite dark. So just rub out this for a second so you can see. Get more paint over me. I'm going to start to use, actually, what I'll do is it's just a thinner flat brush at the moment just for that area. So let's go for this. I'm going to go with some white and some cadmium red. And some Naples yellow. So I just need some more Naples yellow. I'm just thinking of the path here. I want to make that path kind of quite light. So I'm using white, I'm using Naples yellow and a tiny, tiny bit of pink just to give it a bit of warmth. And let's see. Let's just fill that. Now I need to look at where those lighter areas are. So almost a lighter version of this and a slightly darker version. So I'm just putting more white. Get some white there. That's it. And I can see, and let's play, let's try. So we got a bit of cadmium red into that. So let's just make it a bit more pink, possibly. Small amount. Yeah, that's nice. So a bit more of that red. And it's not just going straight across. So you're looking at different angles of the brush, and also some of that color goes into that side. So let's have a look. A bit of water. And then while I've got that color, I'm going to use that, just try it with a rigger brush into parts of this tree. So now I'm thinking about the highlights. like that. Thinner lines, just thinking about the distance. Maybe on the side of that. Maybe starting to use the side of that rigger brush at an angle against the brush so that you've got these little fissures that come out, so you've got texture. Right, greens. Let's just go back to these. Oh, hold on. Before I do that, I can start to work with suggesting those little light bits. So small rigger brush, little kind of angles. Just the tip almost. So the whole thing needs to be more green. So let's go darker with my greens. Thinking about this area. So we're going to go with this really bright green to start with, and then bringing in some hooker's green and some Prussian blue. So I'm making that blue, that green darker with that Prussian blue. Let's go quite dark actually. So let's go more of that Prussian blue. And maybe a bit of that. There we go. That blue, that cerulean blue. And now I'm going back over the dark bits that I did initially, but just making them slightly darker. Yeah, more of that Prussian blue. Let's go kind of quite dark. In between bits. Work your way along. Maybe into some of the shadows now. So get rid of this ground underneath. You can do this to start with. A number of artists work, as I know I keep saying, they work with the darks first. I quite like putting the darks in a bit later. So this is green, but also quite blue. So let's go quite blue, Prussian blue with this, quite dark. It's going to come forward. So where are the shadows? The shadows are there. This area here we need to make darker. There's a bit of silver actually with that green. So what I'm doing is using that hooker's green with the Prussian blue and a bit of white just to make it kind of silvery. There's almost a bit of grey there. And then the next bit, really, most of the rest of it really is with a rigger brush for me. So it's now trying to get that detail or just a bit more detail, thinner lines, etc. Wash my brush. So I'm losing the light. So what I'm going to do is go back to lighter green, Naples yellow. A bit more green. I want to fill this area because these marks here is the board coming through, and I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to do that with my. So I've got light green, leaf green, a bit of Naples yellow, and scraping. So what I'm doing is scraping this different directions because it's fern. And bits that are starting to stick up. So now I can suggest detail, taking the paint off my rigger brush and just rolling that and kind of putting it against the dark green that's behind there. So there's little bits stick up from the edge. There we go, that's it. So it's all about that dark with this on top. Let's just make it slightly lighter with that white. Taking the paint off my brush and maybe rolling that, there it is, rolling that brush so that you've got kind of grass-like. And now I can maybe move up the painting because I've been doing lots of the bottom. So bringing in that hooker's green, maybe a bit of that blue. So maybe more of that and more of that cerulean blue in there, I think. And it's quite dark at the top, so more of that Prussian blue. And just scrape with that rigger brush in different directions so they're starting to get these little fissures again. And then in the real distance of the greens, just adding a bit of white to that. Tiny bit of blue. Want another layer behind these trees here. So in the distance, light blue with a bit of light green there with a bit of white. Okay, with a lot more cerulean blue. Let's make this shadow. These shadows have blue in them. And this side here is quite blue with the green, so I'm going to overcompensate really with the blue in the green. So as I'm going, this is just me, as I'm going, I'm putting more of that cerulean blue in there, but you don't have to. Just trying to make it a bit more of that blue, really. Twist in the brush so that I've got again these little marks against the dark. And then maybe going back to my orange and brown. So I'm going to use that color there in the middle. And I'll start to make it a bit more earthy. So burnt umber. With some orange. So what I'm doing with this rigger brush is just rolling it. So I've got these little spikes coming up. So again, suggesting that it's vegetation. Maybe curving them. And then Naples yellow. I'm just going to try and make it lighter. So it's bracken, isn't it? So it's bracken's quite prickly, I suppose. And then one thing I always do with the trees is put almost like a drawing black line, because at the moment you can't really see what's going on with these trees. But on one side you've got shadow. So I'm going to go and put a line, almost like drawing, on the side of those trees, just to make them stand out a bit. So Prussian blue, bit of that green, that hooker's green or whatever green there. Let's just try that. A bit more water. Maybe a tiny bit of magenta, because that's what we started with the trees, really. So on the edges of those trees, you get a little, there it is, so a little shadow, which is on one side. And also maybe across the whole of it, that might be the dark shadow. And then when it reaches the sky, you can put them almost just as little black shadowy lines. But they're not black, so I don't use black. So this is blue with a bit of crimson and also almost a bit of that Prussian blue, bit of that cerulean blue again. So what have we got? There it is. Sometimes they're just pure. It's blue purple, isn't it, really, what we're doing? Up here, that's it. And sometimes you get them on the other side as well. There we go. Just a wiggly line. So we seem to have avoided the top of these trees. So these branches are really quite interesting. They bend back down. So I'll just come back to my green. I'm going back to my lighter green now. So I'm going to work with light green, a bit of white, lemon yellow. Just try and make it a bit brighter. That's it. So a bit more. So what I've done recently is put in the rigger brush, and it's getting all a bit kind of liney, a bit bitty. So I want some solid areas, so thicker areas. So you kind of need a combination of both of them, really. And again, wherever you see that, let's just put that higher. Brush. So you can see I'm just bringing in a bit of that lighter green to this top bit with an emphasis on blue. Yeah, that's better. So I can now start to bring out and make that green work with the lighter green above here. Just bringing the top bit to life with some green, some lighter green. There it is. That's better. Because it was all too dark at the top. So just trying to make that lighter. Careful that I make sure I keep the blue. Maybe a bit of white, so make it Slightly silvery, slightly lighter. That's better. There we go. So that's a bit of white with that. So I've got patches of light green on top of the dark. But again, trying to paint them in patches like I'm painting them here. So I've got a similar application above. We go pink. We could try maybe some almost pure, getting towards there now, aren't we, really? So maybe I could bring in some Naples yellow, almost pure. Almost last. Let's have a look. Could try some pink. See whether I can warm it up because I want to bring this forward at the moment. And for me, it would probably need to put more color in, really. But oh, that's a bit red. And again, with acrylic, you can just try it. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You just leave it, paint over it. Let's just try and bring some warmth into this foreground. So instead of my rigger brush, what about a palette knife? Maybe some of you work predominantly with palette knives. See what happens. So let's bring that texture on top. So starting to get a bit of texture there. So maybe at an angle, just popping that across. A bit of blue with that. So the pink will pop out, but the blue will hopefully give it kind of a sense of shadow. Highlights of the trees, again, just want to make those lighter. So more white with that color I just used on the ground. Naples yellow again. I think possibly just making it stronger with that Naples yellow, a bit more obvious. Bit of orange. Yeah, that's better. So brighter orange with that. Just bringing it forward. There we go. So it's orange and Naples yellow, but predominantly orange. Got to be careful because there's loads of that. So again, just making. I think we can go on and on, but it's everyone's is slightly different, really, isn't it? So more, probably more detail in the top. It probably needs to be darker blue up there, working with these trees. You could make, we could do that now, look, just see how light we can make that, but with white. So it's got, there we go. Just make that really light green with white. Just so that it kind of comes out a bit more. This is where it gets exciting for me because I'm just rolling the brush, rolling that rigger brush, just flicking it almost. And don't forget the top. That's the thing. So we could keep going. You could work with this. You need to kind of work with the shadows. I'd probably make this a bit more blue actually to bring that kind of forward. This the ferns here are probably more green now, so I'd work back into that area to bring that forward. Um, yeah, that's starting to work. This is dark enough. Maybe a tiny bit of brown. Have a look in this kind of autumnal feel to it. There we go. And it's always good to, I take this one away. Um, Another one I did, which is probably a bit quicker, really, which is there, which is on the cover. So it's quite nice to do two, as I keep saying. There's more marks in this one. It's wider. I suppose there's more crimson in this one. Um, I suppose there's more Naples yellow in that one, but it's quite nice. You could pick out bits, put that in, take bits from that, put that out, leave a tree in, and see how you go.